Sorry, Discord got mad at me.
Hey, welcome everybody. Thanks for showing up.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, and thank you for waiting for us. Sorry for the delay on our end.
We had to squish some internet
The
goblins.
thing got mad, but here we are. So tonight, instead of our regular Friday stream, we are going to do a special Q&A stream about how to get your player unstuck in especially a one-on-one game. So what do you do when your player doesn't have someone else to bounce ideas off of because they're not sitting at kind of a table full of other players? How do you help them kind of get to a decision point, as well as how do you help them feel more comfortable, confident in their RP, things like that?
Yeah.
Honey, is there anything you want to say before we dive into our special question?
Oh, I think that given that this is the time of Thanksgiving, we would be remiss if we weren't just expressing all the time how much we're thankful for our lovely and wonderful and amazing patrons that just like keep showing up and turning out and supporting our work and just making the kinds of stuff that we do possible. Like, thank you, patrons. You're wonderful. We love you.
Yeah, we super appreciate it. And this special session actually came about because of a patron question. So we try to do, well, every single month we ask if anybody has questions or needs help kind of troubleshooting anything in their games. And so here we are to work on that specifically. So are you ready to hear our question?
Honey, hit me with that sweet, sweet question.
Okay, so my duet player sometimes gets locked up for what to do without other players to bounce ideas off of. Do you have any advice for how to make play more engaging or less intimidating for such a player? And just for a little bit more context, this DM is using a sidekick character, but the player doesn't interact with the sidekick character very often. And our DM was wondering if this is because the player maybe feels like it's cheating to ask the sidekick for help. And it also sounds like there are some nerves around RP in general, which I think is super understandable. And so our question for today to kind of work through, what do we do when this happens?
It reminds me a little bit of when you and I started playing, and that, like you've talked about before, that moment, that tip where you were like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, this is something that isn't terrible. Because I was a totally new DM and I didn't know what I was doing, but I left a critical thing out. What was the turning point for you, honey?
So the turning point in our game for me was when my first sidekick character started interacting with my PC. And so then after that point, I loved the RP aspect of the game, and it let me kind of explore my character quite a bit more, and the kind of world and story started to develop from there. And so, I mean, if at any point when we can get to there, I think that that's great. But I mean, and we don't know either, just like our DM doesn't know what exactly is kind of preventing that from happening. Because my impression is that the sidekick character is present, but the player or the PC are having a little bit of trouble interacting with them.
Hmm. So what are some ideas for how the DM can help this person get their player out of their shell? It sounds too like maybe a new to the game kind of player that's a little bit nervous about role playing. And that's one thing about duets too. Like, it is kind of a very intimate experience when you're just sitting across the table, and it can be a little nerve wracking, even if it's somebody that you're quite close to just put yourself out there enough to be like, now I'm a goblin, right? Like,
Yeah. Well, and I think that like putting yourself out there in the intimacy of the one-on-one style. I was telling one of my students one time, he was really into Magic the Gathering. So we were geeking out about, oh shoot, we were geeking out about Ravnica. And I was explaining what we do and about one-on-one D&D. And he was like, I don't know, that sounds super intimate. And I was like, it is, it's awesome. But I can get how that's not always the most exciting offering on the table. So I think if we maybe let's start with the idea of perhaps this is a problem of experience, because when we first started playing, and we were a few sessions in before Marcone started talking to Eliath, and that started to get more comfortable. And it was still a little while. Like my first PC has my voice because it wasn't comfortable to create a different voice for her. And so it's only been later characters that have different voices. And so I think it's something that you have to kind of work your way into. And depending on how comfortable and gregarious you are, that may take a while, which I think is fine. So if we're thinking about how, like, someone being uncomfortable right at the beginning of being able to play, I was thinking about when we first started playing with your parents, and it was like I think maybe our second session with them, and someone got kind of frustrated because they like knew there were things that they could do, but it was like having having 3 or 4 options that started to become kind of overwhelming, and some of those questions where you're like learning something new and you know that there are things to do. And to me, whenever I see that happening, I feel like the player thinks that there's a right answer that they're not getting, or are afraid of what will happen if they don't get the right answer. But especially that too many options, that in itself can be overwhelming.
Yeah, if you drop somebody into a situation and you're like, you can do anything, then they're surefire gonna stop, because like what I shoot purple lasers out of my eyes and fart rainbows. Like, I mean, I don't know. But if you like, one of my favorite things to do is to kind of be like, here's what you can't do. Here are the barriers in between, like what you're trying to do and what you're, and where you're currently at. And then, so like, then there are problems to solve, and that can kind of help get those gears rolling a little bit.
Do you have an example? Because to me, the step of here's what you can't do isn't where I would immediately go.
I don't know if it's like an immediate thing, but it's just something that occurred to me. Like, it's very dangerous to cross the infinite ocean. Guess what we're going to be doing, right? Like, we're going to be sailing across the infinite ocean.
Right. So kind of presenting them with that story problem that's then there for them to solve.
Yeah.
Like, here's the barrier on your adventure, as opposed to, where do you want to go?
Yeah, because then you don't know exactly what's going on. Yeah.
Yeah. So if we kind of move past let's assume that they know what their options are, and it's more just kind of a problem of getting into their character. With the way that our patron phrased the question, I thought maybe if the player's not quite comfortable with bouncing ideas off of a sidekick character, maybe they would be comfortable bouncing ideas off of their DM. And so maybe kind of pulling back from the characters just a little bit, and not forever, but for the time being, pulling back just a little bit, and letting them kind of bounce some ideas off of their DM. So let's see, I worked out an example. Maybe asking them some kind of probing questions as almost a warm-up. So what are they thinking about right now? What are they trying to decide between? And so you as the DM kind of prompting some of those internal reflections to see if that will maybe spark something. And then at least you know where the character is at in terms of like what they're thinking about in the game, and the players practicing communicating.
And it can be really hard too, like if you're thinking like, the greatest game of D&D is going to be like all in character the whole time, right? Like, that's something to aspire to sometimes, but yeah, like Zeke is saying in the chat, Zeke's willing to break immersion a bit if a player or players are utterly stuck with an encounter or puzzle. You have a free pass to be like, okay, let's like zoom out of the back of our character's head and talk about this and try to figure out what's going on. I was just gonna echo and uplift what Zeke said. Like, it's at the end of the day, all good D&D is about communication. And so if that means if breaking character and stepping, like zooming out of your person's POV for a second increases communication, makes things clearer and makes things, more understandable for everybody at the table, then that is a win, right? Like,
Yeah.
the more practice you get, the more you can kind of communicate in character. But like, there's all like, we'll constantly go out of character, even just like if
Hmm.
something's strange or if it seems like there's a misunderstanding or just like a vibe check from time to time. Like, hey, is
Hmm.
this going okay? Like, what are we doing here? Like, like I think that's really helpful, and
Hmm.
I think it's critical to good D&D period, but especially one-on-one D&D.
Yeah. And I almost wonder, I don't know that we have a way of figuring this out right this second, but I almost wonder if that kind of popping in and out of in character versus out of character in some ways might be more common in a one-on-one situation, especially as you're getting things going or as a PC is getting used to a world, something like that.
Mm,
And I mean, I don't know, but especially because you don't have the other players to bounce things off of, and so if the PC isn't talking to their sidekick character, then they are going to be a little bit more limited in terms of how that's going to go. I
yeah.
was thinking too about watching Lisa and Dusty play, where they didn't use a sidekick besides the rug, but it didn't really talk, and so it was kind of DM prompting player reactions. Though he was really immersed in the RP of his character, but just as a like that type of style is different than how you and I usually play. But I
Hmm.
mean, it was really fun to watch, and I'm sure it was fun for them to play too.
Dusty's gnome will forever be one of my favorite characters I've seen on stream.
Yeah, he was so cute. And I think so that is on YouTube. We can link to that video too in our show notes, I think. Um, so to go back to this kind of compromise of the DM kind of intervening a little bit more for the character. So asking them what they're thinking about or what they're trying to decide between. Um, I also kept coming back to our patron saying that she's clarified that it's not cheating to ask the sidekick for help,
Hmm.
but sometimes I think internalizing that that's not cheating or that you're not kind of asking, you know, it's like on a, I remember spelling test at school or like some sort of test at school when you have a question and it's like, I don't know if I can ask my question because you're kind of asking for the answer. You're at least asking for help with the answer, but you're still
Right.
stuck. I feel like it could be almost like that, although not with the not fun test part. Or two, and I think this is probably more likely, is getting stuck thinking that there's a right answer or a way forward that the DM wants you to take. So you know that your
Hmm.
partner has put in a lot of work to creating this world and this game, but you don't want to accidentally totally derail it, but you also don't know like where it's supposed to be going, or that it is probably really open if they're not giving you like, okay, you've got two choices, choose the left or the right path, that's it.
Hmm. I think it's definitely like a combination of all those things, especially like getting to play Gareth in our Tales of Eldora game. As a player, it's so hard to. It's just a nice reminder because I'm used to sitting in the DM chair and just like all the paths are before you, and we'll figure it out wherever we go, right? Like, but it's hard to remember as a player
Mm-hmm.
that it's gonna be okay, and if you make a wrong decision, we're still playing a game, and it's gonna be fine, right? Like, and I don't mean like
Mm-hmm.
wrong decision, like that wasn't part of the script. I mean wrong, like oh we're all dead, right? Like, um, but yeah, I mean that's what jams me up is making decisions has consequences in D&D, and that's the fun and that's the thrill, but at the same time
Mm-hmm.
there's pressure there, right? Like with the fun of consequences
Yeah.
also comes sometimes consequences that you weren't expecting or aiming for. So
Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes not understanding what those consequences might be, especially if you're at the beginning of a game when everything's possible. Okay, well, if I accidentally sneeze, then like this whole town might die, or like I think it can. That was really dramatic, but you know what I mean. That it can be kind of you can get extra stuck not being able to anticipate like the proportion of a reaction to a situation. Like the time when my character jumped on a carpet, out of a window onto a carpet, like 300 feet in the air,
As a
a flying
bear.
carpet. You were like, "Are you sure?" As a bear, you're like, "Are you sure?" I didn't know. I didn't know at the time the like damage you would take for falling. I just assumed that big sneezes. I just assumed that she would make it onto the carpet and it would be fine.
I'll never forget the thrill of looking up how much does a grown brown bear weigh and comparing it to the size of flying carpet that was floating outside the skyscraper window.
Mm-hmm.
I was just like, this is the good stuff right here. But and that's
Just as a note, if that's not a fun thing for you to know, you don't have to look it up. Oh, sorry, I can't see you, so I didn't realize you were talking.
No, it's okay. I think there's a delay too, but I think that's definitely
Yes.
the hang up, right? Like it's not.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's maybe out of consideration for the DM or for the other person that um there's that hesitancy, and I think that especially as a
Mm-hmm.
new DM, it's easy to hang on to a script or like more of a railroady kind of adventure, and you might even be kind of low key communicating that in some way, or like this path, wink wink nudge
Mm-hmm.
nudge, and then you have like this is the decision point, but boy, this path to the right is um, I think that could also be a factor in some games too. But I think it's like with anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like uh, you do it and you get better and stronger, and um, still, like there are gonna be awkward beats and missteps, and we've been playing for like 2.5 years now,
Yeah,
3 years,
something like that. In a while.
and
2.5.
yeah, and yesterday, no, on our last D&D game, kind of ended weirdly because I forgot my own advice and didn't like the decisions. Like you were great at making decisions, and then I was not great at um the yes and part of my job, or like if it's not yes and no but, right? Like having something still continuing
Mm-hmm.
moving forward that was fun. We got to move forward, but it wasn't fun, right? Um, so it's just gonna happen, and it's the awkward is worth the. Oh wait, no, the excellence is worth the occasional awkward.
Yeah, and I know we don't know how long they've been playing together or anything like that, so I don't want to make assumptions. But I think this is probably a relatively common issue.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about my very first session, so like when we played First Blush, and you were describing the tunnel that my character was walking down, where it's dark and like looking back, you were asking me to like roll to see a trap, but I rolled really low. And so you're like, okay, well, you can't really see what's going on. And at the time, I thought, okay, well, I'm just going to wait till I can figure it out. I'm not just going to like blaze forward and see what happens. Whereas, like, you kind of need to blaze forward and see what happens a little bit while trusting the person across the table from you that they're not just going to wipe you out right at the beginning. But it was still kind of still learning the like, okay, if I do this, then this is what's probably going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what these things mean. Although there is really a magic of not knowing, like, okay, I rolled an 8 on this insight check. And so this person probably is lying to me because I feel like they are. But when you say, like, oh, no, they're telling you the truth, like, okay, cool, they're telling me the truth. And there wasn't that separation. That was really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. How do we get that back?
You don't.
No, I think the answer is random DCs.
Mm. or just really high DCs. You rolled a 20, they were definitely telling you the truth. But the
Or
DC was 30. Surprise.
you have to roll for your modifier at any given moment. So for this check, roll a d20, you add or negative that to your other skill check. It's all random.
But not that. Okay, back on our
better ideas.
Better ideas. Okay, so to kind of think about if none of these things are working, I think another thing that you could do, if we just plan to give the player more time to feel comfortable with RP, so not asking them to work in character, leaning more into the kind of regular conversation between two people. Okay, what are you trying to decide between? And you be, as the DM, you be the other person that they're bouncing ideas off of. So instead of like, I'm not going to say, what do you want to do? Like, okay, what are the options here? And then as a player in that sense, help them work through some of your thought process as a DM. So you're kind of pulling back the screen a little bit, or pulling back the curtain. Is that the right phrase?
Yep.
Saying like, okay, if we go into the haunted forest, I have some cool creatures picked out for us to encounter, but I could also see stopping in this village over here, and maybe we could try to find that magical item that your character has been wanting. Which one of those sounds better to you? And so getting it like really narrow with the options, while also kind of you're almost modeling the type of thought process that you're asking for, and then maybe slip into your sidekick character.
Yeah.
Are you still here? Oh, good. You're
yes.
still here.
So
okay.
I think that's a great thing to do is like, hey, okay, like these are the basic options. And that's kind of what we've built in with our sidekick characters in our game, right? Like, one of our characters, Marcone, is going to take the more lawful or like good aligned path. And then our other character is going to be like, let's make this crazy plan and try this thing out. And he's a little bit more neutral, chaotic. And so at the end of the day, they're going to come to loggerheads, and who gets to break the tie, right? It's going to be the player character. And that's one way that you can present a couple of options while still leaning into the role-playing part if you're not going to have that conversation out of character. But it's, there's nothing wrong with having it out of character too. Communication.
Yeah. Sorry. So what I'm trying to say is like have it out of character and then kind of narrow the options from there. So you're basically presenting what those like 2, maybe 3 things would be. And then, yes, we have found that to be really helpful. That's why in Tales of Eldora, we have a sidekick and a DMPC. In our Land of Vampires campaign, we had a sidekick and a DMPC, just because it does give your player, or it does give you as the character, like other things to bounce off of. So you're not just kind of reacting to the one perspective. You have more to kind of pick from.
The biggest thing is just time and experience and talking to each other. I think about like if you feel like things are going weird, or if there's something that you'd like to see your DM or your player do that they're not doing in game, then like it's okay to have that conversation as long as you're coming at it from a non-judgmental, don't communicate to the other person that they're not good at D&D, because they will not play D&D with you anymore. It's I think one of my favorite things about our duet game is that we get to talk about our duet game out of game, right? Like I love playing with you, and I love the stories that we tell together, but at the same time, like we also get to talk about what's going on with our characters and behind the scenes and how we play different things out, and we get to appreciate the cool things that we do, and I totally didn't see that coming, and like I think that's one of the special things about playing one-on-one is the out of character conversations and the kind of shared joyous experience that they can lead to.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about that, but that might actually be, I added that to our list of possible solutions, is talking about it out of game to kind of normalize those sorts of interactions. And that would be another great place to kind of ask those character questions. So I really wanted to set up some suspense here. What was your character thinking? What were they experiencing? Or are they leaning one way or another? Because sometimes we'll do that. I think that can be really helpful with planning if it's like, okay, this is probably the direction that we're going, so just have something kind of ready to go. I maybe an out of game conversation would be the place to start. The last thing I wanted to add, and this is something that happens to me as a DM a lot. I see people talking online. I know it can it can happen or can be kind of prevalent, but comparing yourself especially yourself as a DM to other people that you see DMing, or like seeing the kind of idealized conversations around like, oh my gosh, I just had the best session, blah, 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 blah. To make sure not to be comparing like your home game to other people's, as I think that our perception, like what's negative or what's not going so well, is going to be magnified to you in that instance because it's not lining up with this other version. Whereas watching in someone else's game, you're not going to notice that quite as much. And so I'm not saying that is what's happening, but I just know for myself as a DM, like every single time before we stream, I have to kind of sit myself down and have a talk about it because I get really nervous. I mean, even if we're not streaming and just like I'm just DMing for you, I still have to like, okay, pull things back. You're your own DM, like with your own style, and that's just going to be what it's going to be. And as long as your player's having fun and happy to be hanging out with you, and they probably are, then you're set.
Yeah. Be gracious with yourself, just like you be gracious, sitting on the other side of the table.
I think for me, just kind of adding on to that, the thing to kind of lean into would be making sure the player knows that what they're choosing can't be wrong. And if that means narrowing in their options, like maybe they want to be railroaded a little bit, that's fine. And so instead of having things be super open, see if you can kind of narrow things in. And whether you are communicating that as a character, whether you're communicating that as your sidekick character, or just like as the DM, hey, I kind of imagine us going this direction or this direction. What do you think? And then kind of seeing where it plays out from there. And maybe that will help kind of break up some of the logjam of that discomfort. But that may just take a little bit of time too. I know for me, like when we were first playing, listening to Critical Role helped me just to kind of like hear people being a character, hearing the different options. This is, like this is how they're reacting during combat, and this is how they're having these various conversations and in and out of character. Kind of listening to that was really helpful for me. So if there's a game that you enjoy that you can listen to a model for, and or that your player can listen to a model for, that was really beneficial for me when I was first starting out, just because there's so much to kind of take in.
Yeah, I love that. Figuring out good communication and recognizing and communicating that there's no wrong answer, and that it's all going to result in more fun times together, rolling dice and telling stories. I think that's great.
Yeah. And I think I really do like this question, because I think that there has been a lot of communication on behalf of the DM, but it may just take a little bit of time for that to get internalized for the character. So honey, when you were DMing for like after, not after school, but when you were DMing for D&D, what would you do if you had like one kid who was really into their character and one kid who wasn't? Did you have any strategies or anything for that?
Ooh, I think the main thing that I did was I think the leading questions is the direction I went. Like, I think it's really important to, with that group, I think any DM can do it, but especially with a group of players that are coming in at different levels and with different expectations, is to set those expectations. And one of the things that I said at the beginning was that I would like for us to, as much as possible, be interacting and communicating with each other through the voice of our characters. And I explained, what role play was and stuff like that. And so when a student would say, my character goes over and starts screaming at the bartender, I would say, okay, what does that sound like? And then they would, kind of fill that in. And I think the power of those leading questions is, well, powerful.
Yeah, I like that as a really specific, okay, well, I want to do this, or my character wants to do this. And then that prompt to get to kind of push gently towards an I statement, or to ask them to act out something small that they feel comfortable with. I think that's a really cool point.
And I think at the beginning too, like just starting with, okay, and what does Sir Farquaad look like when he, how do they, how do they walk? What do they wear? Stuff like that can be really helpful. If you're prompting, kind of describing a physical characteristic, it feels less, it's all abstract, but it feels less abstract than kind of mannerisms and, attitudes and things like that.
So that's so funny. It's the opposite for me. But we also have a post from the podcast that I did with Hogan Chance, where you have the kind of prompts of introducing the character, that we can link to that in the show notes too, because I think that can be really helpful. It's like, I think 13 sentences. And so if perchance the player in question is a little bit more introverted, they might like having something prepped ahead of time, instead of it needing to be spur of the moment. And if that's the case, maybe even in session, you kind of give them, before you guys play, hey, next session, I think we're going to be looking at, going into this new town. So maybe be thinking about what sorts of people you might want to talk to, or where you might want to go first, to get kind of some of those gears rolling. Because I know for me as an introvert, if I can be prepared in advance, I feel a lot more confident than if I'm just in a totally new situation without any sort of expectation or preparation for what that's going to look like or be.
Yeah, any kind of prep. And like that prep could also, I mean, you just mentioned it, but point to that co-creation that we're always talking about with the one-on-one game, right? Like, we're going into this town, be thinking about who you might know there, or what you might want to do, stuff like that. So, yeah, cool.
And into at D&D, the player side of things, I think, is so important, that prep going in. But until you're not going to be ready for that right at the beginning, or even if you're kind of stuck in RP, maybe you're not quite ready for that at all. And that's where things need to break through a little bit. So I think maybe finding the right kind of, just feel free to play around with it, finding the right combination of questions that kind of spark some sort of interest or response on behalf of the player for their character. That may be the way forward. Thank you again to our patron for this wonderful question. I hope that those have, I hope that that's given you some ideas of some things to try. I'll get this polished up as a blog post as well, because I'm sure that there are lots of people with this question, but we'll have some of like the kind of major points in the show notes as well. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Pink Sparkles. I'm so glad that was helpful. So thank you, friends in chat. And if you are watching this later, please do like or subscribe or follow or whatever the happy buttons say. That would be awesome. Is there anything else that we need to say besides a huge thank you to our friends in chat and our friends on YouTube for hanging out? And of course, to our wonderful patrons who sponsored our stream.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, happy Thanksgiving. I wish you all safe and joyous and wonderful. Oh, Ketra. What I was trying to say is thank you all so much and have a beautiful, wonderful Thanksgiving. And just, it's I wish you all safety and wellness and all the good things. And we're just so thankful for you. I can't believe like every day I wake up and I'm like, oh my gosh, people are supporting the kinds of like we get to write D&D stuff and talk about D&D stuff and people help us do that. It's amazing. So thank you all.
Thank you. And have a wonderful Thanksgiving and a nice weekend.